Hey, everybody, welcome to the workshop, How to Launch Your Podcast in 30 Days to Grow Your Business and Attract Your Ideal Clients. I'm Eric K. Johnson. My company is Podcast Talent Coach. Thanks for being here. This workshop going to take probably about 45 minutes or so as we roll through the content here. I want to show you what it's going to take to actually launch your podcast in 30 days. At the very end of this workshop, I'm going to give you a free resource, 75 ways to drive engagement with your podcast. This will work for any content that you're creating, but it's ways to drive engagement with your audience, and it helps you build those relationships. So as we go through the next 45 minutes or so, turn off your distractions, give me your full attention. I'm going to move pretty quickly here. So make sure you have a pen and paper, something to jot down some notes on. By the end of this workshop, you'll see exactly what it's going to take to launch your show out into the world and have your podcast up and running. As we do this, what I want you to understand, what I want you to keep in mind is getting more clients and getting more customers isn't necessarily about a podcast. It's more about who you are being while you're on the podcast. Podcasting is my favorite medium, but it's not the only medium. And what I'm going to teach you today not only works with podcasting, but it works on YouTube and it works on a variety of other platforms here as well. I'm going to show you how to launch a podcast, but the podcast isn't the critical part. It's who you're being and the relationships you're building with that podcast that will really make the difference and change your life. It's all about building trust with your audience. People do business with those they know, like, and trust because it's so much easier to believe that you're going to solve your problems when you trust the individual that is helping you solve that problem. And using your podcast to grow that trust is one of the most effective ways to do that. You are having a one-on-one conversation with your audience each and every episode, and it builds trust like no other medium. If you and I are watching a video, we're seeing the exact same thing. But when you're listening to a podcast, it comes to life in the theater of the mind, unlike video can do. And when you build those relationships through your podcast, it's all about self-revelation. It's about revealing things about yourself to grow relationships. If you think about the relationships you have with your best friend, you probably know everything there is to know about your best friend because they've told you everything. You may not have been there for the time when they cracked their head open when they were 6, but they told you about that, and you feel like you know them intimately because they've told you everything about their life. On your podcast, you don't have to tell people everything about your life, but the more you share with people and the more you reveal, the more they get to know who you are, what you're about, what you value, how you operate, and they build that relationship with you. If you've ever met somebody that you've listened to for a long time on the radio and you go, man, I know we've never met, but I feel like I know you because I've been listening to you forever. That's the kind of intimate knowledge that people will have about you. And that's the relationship that we're trying to build with our podcast. And when you do that, um, attracting clients becomes so much easier. And it all happens and it all begins through self-revelation. I read this great book. It's called They Ask You Answer, and it's by Marcus Sheridan, and it's amazing. Marcus, in this book, shares a study that shows that consumers have typically gone through 70% of the buying process and their decision making and their research on the product before they ever reach out and talk to a company about that particular product. So they're 70% of the way through the buying process before you ever hear from them. So if you just start trying to build a relationship with somebody by the time they reach out to you, they're 3/4 of the way through making that buying process or making that buying decision. When you're creating a relationship with them on the podcast, you're building that relationship with them first so that when they call you or reach out to you or email you or visit your website, you already have a bit of that relationship built. And now the rapport is there and you can get into talking about how you solve their issues. Before we get into how to create that, let me tell you a little bit about me. I've spent the last 35 years in radio, coaching on-air radio talent and building successful radio stations. This was my very first radio gig here in this little Quonset hut. The tower is right there to the left in the back. You can see that white tower. That was the actual transmitter tower. We were broadcasting from the site. The transmitter is that big box that sits right behind this white Quonset hut. This had 4 rooms if you count the bathroom. It was a crazy small radio station. I grew up with my brother, children of a single mom. We lived in this little house here. My mom made about 12 grand a year and always had a great side hustle just to make ends meet and help us go on vacation occasionally. She taught me the love of the side hustle, and I've had one ever since. I went to school here at the University of Nebraska, got my degree in architecture. I loved architecture, started drafting when I was in 7th grade, and fully intended to own my own architecture firm. But as I was going to school here at the University of Nebraska, I started falling out of love with architecture. And my brother worked at that little radio station. So I got the job there at this little Quonset hut and started falling in love with radio. But I was so close to finishing the degree, I thought, man, changing majors now would be nuts. So I finished my architecture degree and I stayed in radio. And I've been able to interview and meet some amazing people like George Strait, Ice-T, Zach Brown, Lady Gaga. It's been amazing. But more importantly, I've been able to attract an audience and activate that audience. I've been able to build relationships with people and get them to take action to do amazing things. And through our radio stations, we were able to raise hundreds of thousands of bottles of water for the Open Door mission to help people living on the streets. We were able to get artists to come and do concerts for us to raise even more money. This is the country band Old Dominion here with us with Food Bank for the Heartland. We were raising money for the food bank. And if you look closely at this check, we raised $1,014,527 for the food bank through the concerts that we were holding through these. And it all comes down to activating your audience and getting them to take action. And they do that because you have the relationship with them. And because I've had the relationship with my audience, companies like Wendy's and Twizzlers and Cox Communications have paid me to endorse their products to my clients or to my audience because of the relationship I have with my audience. So launching the podcast and creating great content isn't all there is. It's all about building relationships with your audience. My podcast has led me to speak on the New Media Expo stage and podcast movement. I've been on the Trailblazers Business Summit. Dave Jackson, who runs the School of Podcasting, and I do a show together. I'm the Dean of Podcasting in the 48 Days Eagles community, all because I have a podcast and I built amazing relationships with people. And your podcast allows you to do that because you're having that one-on-one conversation with people every week and sharing a bit of your story with them. Now, in the sales process, there's 4 stages of the sales process. First, it's building rapport with your consumer. Next, it's qualifying them to make sure they're right for you and you're right for them. Then you want to educate them a bit on what you have to offer on your solution, and then you close the sale. And many people think each of these steps are equal, 25% each. But in reality, building rapport is 40% of the sales process. And qualifying your prospect, making sure they're right for you and you're right for them, is the next 30%. Educating, well, let me tell you what I have that can solve your problem. That's 20%. And then 10% is the close. Far too many people rush to educating. They say, hey, Rick, let me tell you about my solution. Here's what it does. Here's all the bells and whistles, and I think you should buy it, without ever qualifying Rick to make sure that he's right for the solution, or to ever build any rapport so Rick gets to fall in love with who I am and what I do and the story behind what I am. If you think back to that 70% of the buying process before they ever reach out, there's the 70% right there. They build rapport and qualify themselves, then they reach out to get educated on your solution. And the secret sauce is that your podcast allows you to build rapport and allows you to explain to your audience how you help people so they self-qualify themselves. And then by the time they reach out to do business with you, they're 70% of the way through the buying process. And that's what your podcast allows you to do. This is another amazing book. It's called The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes. In it, Chet says only 3% of your target audience is in the buying mode today. They're actively out searching for a solution to their problem. Only 3%. If you look at the hierarchy, he says 3% are buying now. Another 7% could be convinced to buy today. So that's 10%. The next 30% are the not now crowd. That means they're going to need what you have to offer. They just don't need it today. So if you're selling cars, I'm going to need a car, but probably a year or two from now. I don't need a car today, but I'm going to need a car. So thanks for the offer, but I'm not sure I need that today. If you are selling toasters, I'm going to need a toaster, but my toaster that I have right now still works. If you're selling coaching to businesses, well, I haven't launched my business yet, so I'm not ready for you yet. So that's the not now crowd. The next 30%, they don't think they need what you have to offer because they lack information. So in this case, maybe you sell mattresses and people say, wow, I have a mattress. My mattress is fine. And then you educate them a bit and you say, well, do you realize that mattresses wear out after 7 years? How long have you had your mattress? We've had it since we bought the house 12 years ago. Well, chances are your mattress is worn out and you just don't know it yet. Oh, well, maybe I do need what you have to offer. So these people don't know they need what you have because they need more information. And then the last 30%, they're never interested because maybe you're selling nonfiction books and they only read fiction. Or maybe you're selling Toyotas and their husband works for Ford. Chances are they're not going to buy your Toyota because they get a really good deal over at Ford. So they're never going to be interested unless something changes. Maybe he loses his job at Ford and goes to work for IBM. Well, now he might be interested in your Toyota because circumstances have changed. So what happens when you use your podcast to build relationships rather than just sell? When they move up to that 10% at the top, when their situation changes and they're ready to buy, you already are a step ahead because you've built the relationship with them. When the not now people get to be the now people because now is the time to buy, they think, who can I buy from? They think of you because they have the relationship. That's the power of podcasting. It allows you to attract your ideal clients to you and build that relationship so you're not chasing them and trying to convince them to buy what you have. It's all about relationships. This is Ann Sullivan. Ann teaches harp. And people would come to her home there in Pittsburgh, and she would teach them how to play the harp. She plays with the Pittsburgh Philharmonic, and she's an amazing harpist. Well, COVID hit, and people could no longer come to her house for harp lessons. So she went online and she started teaching harp online. Next thing you know, she has far too many clients because now her market isn't just Pittsburgh. Her market is worldwide, basically. So Anne started hiring other people to help her teach harp, and she pivoted and started promoting the company rather than her services. She came to me and she said, I need to find a way to get the word out more. How can I do that? We launched her podcast in 30 days, and now she runs a company where she has teachers teaching for her as she just talks harp on her podcast, and it's amazing. Tavana Denise is very similar. Tavana came to me. She was a nurse. She got out of nursing because nursing was sucking the life out of her. Long hours, people treating her poorly. She wanted to be an entrepreneur, so she got out of nursing. Suddenly, all of these other nurses started coming to her saying, how did you do it? How did you get out of nursing? Help us do it. So she started coaching these other women to get out of nursing. But she needed a way to spread her message and to reach other nurses to help them do the same thing. We launched her podcast in 30 days, and she uses her podcast to promote her roundtables where she brings nurses in to discuss their situation, where they are, and figure out how to get help to launch their next thing. And at those roundtables, she invites these nurses to enroll in her program where she helps them launch. And she uses the podcast to build the relationships with the nurses, promote her roundtables, and enroll people in her program. And we were able to launch her podcast in 30 days as well. So, can you see how podcasting isn't just about the podcast? Podcast is about who you are on the podcast. There are a ton of gurus out there that will show you how to launch a podcast. There are a lot of YouTube videos that will teach you how to launch. You can go watch that and figure out exactly how to do it. But what they miss is the personal nature of the podcast. It's not about the podcast, it's about who you're being on the podcast. And without that foundation, you're building your podcast on a house of cards and it won't survive. You need to build the foundation of that why and of that relationship first in order to get people to stick around. Because unfortunately, many podcasts fade away. Many podcasts don't stick around to see the light of day after quite a while. And it's unfortunate because you put a lot of effort into launching your podcast and creating your content. You have great content out there, but are you leveraging that content to its fullest potential? Are you leveraging that content in the best way possible to build those relationships with people? This is my podcast launch formula. Launching a podcast is not that difficult. These are the 5 steps that you need to launch. The first is your foundation. Now, your foundation is your why. You create your foundation, you understand exactly who you're targeting, the listeners you're trying to bring in, and you get clear on why you're podcasting in the first place. This is the critical component that most podcast gurus fail to teach you. They don't build this foundation. And so when you go through the next 4 steps, it doesn't hold up because we haven't built the foundation. So when you build the foundation of your podcast, you're clearly understanding the why. You understand what your topic is and who your target market is. When we create your show name and your graphics and everything to be a cohesive brand for your podcast. That's what the foundation is all about. And it's critical that you build that solid foundation first before you start recording the podcast. The next 4 steps are super easy, but the next 4 steps don't hold up without a foundation. Next, we record your podcast. If you're doing a solo episode, you can record straight into recording software. There's free software called Audacity. It's Audacity, Audacity. It's free to download. You can record your episode right into Audacity. It's super easy. If you're doing a co-hosted show with somebody or you're doing an interview style show, I recommend you record on Zoom because Zoom will give you both video and audio. And now you have that to repurpose across social media and YouTube and other places as well. So record your show, and that way you have the file ready to roll. The 3 pieces of equipment that you're going to need to record your show is a computer, a microphone, and some headphones. Earbuds work just fine like I'm using today. Microphone, there's a inexpensive microphone. It's about $75. It's called a Samson, Samson Q2U. Just the letters and numbers. Samson Q2U. You can actually get a Samson Q2U podcaster kit for about $99, which comes with a nice boom arm and a windscreen and whole thing. You don't need to go spend $600 on a microphone. In fact, the microphone isn't the thing that gives you the best sound. It's the room that gives you the best sound. You want soft surfaces and things like that. You can have the best microphone in the world and still sound like garbage because your room's not right. And you can have an inexpensive microphone and sound great if you have the right room. So a lot of soft surfaces around, you'll be perfect. All right. So once you record the episode, now we need to edit it. So we go in and we clean it up. We trim off the front and back. Any mistakes that we made, we edit out of that. And the best thing to do is to edit your audio in Audacity. Again, it's free audio software. So if you are recording on Zoom or you're recording somewhere else, StreamYard or Riverside or whatever you're using to record, you take that file and put it into Audacity and you edit it. And a lot of people get caught up and think editing is this really mysterious thing to do. Editing's super easy. Editing audio is a lot like editing a Word document. It uses all the same commands. So cut, delete, paste, all of those commands are the same in Audacity as they would if you were editing a Word document. If you highlight a word in Word and you hit delete, it goes away. Same thing in Audacity. Highlight part of the audio, hit delete, it goes away. It's super easy. Then you'll need to add any music or effects in there if you'd like, if you want to get really fancy. Don't have to, it just adds a little showbiz to it. And then export your audio. And when you export your audio, it's have you ever exported a Word document to a PDF? That's what exporting your file to an MP3 is like. You just go up under File and you hit Export and you select MP3 and it exports your file as an MP3 and you're all ready to go. An audio host is like it's like a storage unit for your audio. Right? So when you create all of your audio, you go and put it in your storage unit. And then what you do is you'll tell all of the podcast players like Apple and Spotify what your address is of your storage unit. And it automatically gets ingested into all the platforms. It's super easy. There's Libsyn, there's Blueberry, there's a variety of audio hosts out there. I like Libsyn because their support is fantastic and it's fairly inexpensive. You can get a Libsyn account for as little as $7 a month. It's really pretty cheap, and that hosts all of your audio. So once you upload it to Libsyn, you add your artwork and everything there in Libsyn. Libsyn charges you by the file sizes that you're storing, which is another reason you want to use MP3s and not WAV files. Because if you use WAV files, it will eat up your storage really fast. But it's fairly inexpensive and super easy. So we upload it. If you can upload a photo to Facebook, you can upload audio to your audio host. It's really easy. You just drag it in, fill out some boxes, and you're good to go. And then finally, the last step there is to distribute it. And so what we'll do is we take the address of your audio host and we give it to all of the podcast players. So iHeartRadio, Spotify, Samsung, Apple Podcasts, all of those. And in Libsyn, all you got to do is check some boxes and agree to some terms and conditions, and it goes out to everybody. And now every week, when you record and edit and upload, it automatically goes out to all of the podcast platforms. You don't have to do that every week. Once we've connected it to all of the podcast players, we just do these middle three: record, edit, upload. That's all you do each week, and you're good to go. It's really pretty basic when it comes to recording your podcast. But much like writing a book or recording a song, creating the podcast isn't the challenge. It's getting people to come and listen to it and spreading your word and building that audience. And so once we get it out there, and then the real work begins, it's how do we promote it and how do we get people to partner with us so they can spread it to their audience. And that's where pod fading comes in. Pod fading is a term that was coined in podcasting. Pod fading is when a podcast just kind of fades away. Like it was there last week and no more episodes have been published. And I thought pod fading was kind of a myth because the podcast industry says many podcasts fade away after 7 episodes. And I thought that's crazy. Like 7 episodes and the podcast goes away. I was on a call with a client one day And we were looking for podcasts for her to be interviewed on. She's in the caregiving space. So she helps women in the sandwich generation who are taking care of elderly parents and taking care of their kids at the same time. She helps them cope and work their way through that caregiving. So we were looking for other caregiving podcasts for her to appear on. And I'll tell you, about every other or every third podcast I looked at hadn't published any episodes in like 2 years. Like they faded away. The stats in Apple say that there are about 4 million podcasts right now, but only about 2 million are actively publishing fresh content because the podcasts just fade away. People just give up. And they give up for three really big reasons. And these are the reasons I want you to overcome as you launch your podcast. The first reason is they don't have anybody holding them accountable, right? You need somebody to hold you accountable to do that podcast each and every week to make sure it's there and create a community around you to help you with that accountability. Because when you're able to create accountability and you're able to create that community around you to support you, you're able to find the inspiration to get in and record your podcast each and every week. But how do you start that? How do you get in and do that? Well, that's where my podcast launch accelerator comes in. So those are the 5 steps to launch a podcast. But if you need accountability and you need the support and the community around you to help you launch, take your hand and walk you every step of the way, Podcast Launch Accelerator can help you do that. There are 6 steps to the Podcast Launch Accelerator. First is your purpose. That is your why. The second is your program. That's the content that you're going to create. What are you talking about? What is your topic and your subject matter? And then third is the platform. What is your podcast going to look like? Is it going to be a solo podcast? Are you having a partner? Are you going to be interviewing other people? What's the container we're going to put our program in? Those 3 are the foundation. And in the Podcast Launch Accelerator, that foundation is that first part that we create. That's the piece that everybody misses. We're going to make sure that you're on solid foundation there. And then once you've created that, each week you just produce, publish, and promote, which are the 3 Ps to successful podcasts. So producing it is recording it and editing it. Publishing it is posting it into your audio host. And then promoting it, we get out and we tell everybody about it and invite them to the party. All right. I'd love to have you participate in the Podcast Launch Accelerator. It's a program that I offer where we launch your podcast in 30 days. So by going through the Podcast Launch Accelerator, by the end of the program, you'll have your podcast launched to the world. It's 4 weeks and your podcast is up and running. You're going to lay the foundation to be known as an influencer in your niche. You will begin building those powerful, profitable relationships. But more importantly, you're going to free up your time because I'm going to show you how to do it systematically. So you're not spending all of your time trying to create your podcast instead of being out spreading your message. The Podcast Launch Accelerator comes with 5 live launch training sessions. This is where I get on and I teach you every bit that you need to know to launch your podcast. I walk you through all 5 of the steps that we just talked about. Each week we get on the call and they're about an hour long. Call number 3 is a little longer than that because that's the editing session where we get in and roll up our sleeves and actually edit your podcast. But they're mostly about an hour long. I give you homework at the end of each one so you can go get that homework done by the next call. And we keep moving forward. By the end of the 4 calls, your podcast is live and up on Apple Podcasts. You get lifetime access to the recordings. So if you fall off the train or you need some extra help, you can come back and watch any of the videos anytime you'd like, both audio and video. So you can get in and look at those anytime. You get a full online toolkit. This online toolkit contains worksheets, checklists, and a ton of other tools to show you how to organize your content, execute your plan in just a few minutes a day, and methodically build your show. These are 3 dozen resources that I have created over my 35 years in radio, you get access to all of them as part of this program. You also get membership in the private Podcast Fast Blueprint Facebook group as another place for you to ask me questions. This is also a great help for you to get feedback between our calls. You can also connect with others and develop great ideas for your show. You get a 30-minute one-on-one coaching call with me just to ensure your blueprint is clearly defined and efficient. You know, my clients pay me $250 for a 1-hour one-on-one coaching session with me. I'm giving it to you just to ensure that you are on the right path as you launch your podcast. And then you get access to all future calls, updates, and versions of the program. So whenever I teach the course again live, you're welcome to come join at no cost. And whenever I update the course, you also get access at no cost. It's just like taking the course again whenever you'd like. So if you'd like to launch a second podcast, or maybe the first one didn't go quite as you planned and you want to launch it again, relaunch it, you get lifetime access and you can come through the program at any time. It's an incredible value, but I want to make you a great deal today. The enrollment in the Podcast Launch Accelerator is typically $997, but I want to get you up and running. So I want to get you into this. I got some great bonuses for you. I have a course. If you're going to do interview style podcasts, I've created a course called Creating Powerful and Unique Podcast Interviews. It's an online course, a video course. It shows you exactly how I go about interviewing George Strait and Ice-T and Lady Gaga and all of the rest, and Carrie Underwood and Brooke and Big and Rich and everybody that I've interviewed. It's all in this course. I've interviewed them on being interviewed and what they enjoy about it. This course will help you create powerful and unique interviews. You get that as a bonus just to make sure you know the kind of content to create. You get a ticket to my Audience Explosion Blueprint event, which is an event where I help you grow your audience, because once you're up and running, you go, okay, now what do? We got to grow the audience. So I'll bring you to that. And I'll give you another bonus, which is an additional one-on-one call with me. So you'll get 2 one-on-one calls with me to make sure that you're launched properly. We have all of the loose ends tied up and we're getting you up and running exactly as you need to be. So all of those takes the value to $6,300. Again, enrollment is $997, but to make it super easy for you, I'm going to give you a deal today and let you in at $497. So it's $497. It's a 4-week program. By the end of the program, you will have your podcast launched. All you have to do is do the step-by-step process that I show you through the course and get you up and running. And I'm going to be there every step of the way, teaching you live in a setting, letting you ask your questions and get those answered. Plus, you'll have the 2 one-on-one calls with me to make sure that you're off on the right foot. You can enroll in Podcast Launch Accelerator at podcasttalentcoach.com/PLA. You'll be able to find it right there and get yourself enrolled. I'm going to give you a guarantee to make sure that you're up and running. It's called the Guaranteed to Launch Guarantee. That if by the end of the 4 weeks you're not launched, I will get on the phone with you and we will make sure that you get launched. We will get over whatever humps and hurdles that you're getting stuck. Maybe you missed something in the 3rd call and we need to refine that to get you up and running. No problem whatsoever. I want to make sure that you are up and running. And I do this because I think that the world needs more relationships, because today the technology in the world has sucked the relationships out of society today. We just don't deal with people. We go to the gas station, we pay at the pump. We don't talk. When I was a kid, Jim owned the gas station down on the corner. And whenever my mom had a problem with the car, we would go down to Jim. Jim lived up on the corner. He owned the Phillips 66. We'd take it down to Jim and he'd fix it. Right? But if we were causing trouble, Jim knew it and he'd call my mom and all of a sudden we're getting in trouble too. So it was a double-edged sword for me as a kid. But we don't have those kinds of relationships today. You know, I used to play with all the kids in the neighborhood. My son sits on his Xbox and talks to his buddy in Minnesota and his other one in Canada, and there's another one in Washington. And he's got friends, but they're spread out around the country and they're not that, hey, come over for a sleepover Saturday night kind of relationship. We order our groceries on the internet and we never even see the people that deliver them. They drop them off on our front porch and ring the doorbell and run before we ever get there. Like we don't have relationships. And I truly believe podcasting allows us to build those relationships that society so desperately needs. And that's my goal, to help people launch their podcast and start building those relationships. So if you want to be part of it, podcasttalentcoach.com/PLA. You can get in for $497. Our classes start in 2 weeks, Thursday, March 6th. They will be at the same time. So they'll be at 5 o'clock Central Time. And for 4 weeks, they're about an hour long call, and we will walk you through it. In the first week, we go through your purpose and your program. So you'll know your why. We're going to allocate your production time. We're going to define your podcast style and personality so you can start building those relationships. We're going to define your target and get perfectly clear on your target listener so we know who you're targeting. In week 2, we're going to create the name of your show and your graphics. We're going to get your hosting account, get your equipment. We're going to define your process, and we're actually going to record an episode after our second call. You're going to hit record and get that episode recorded. In week 3, we're going to edit the show. That's all we're going to do, because it takes a bit to learn how to edit. A lot of tips and tricks I'm going to show you: how to make your audio sound great, how to make your edits sound great, how to get it all cleaned up, how to export it as the MP3 so it's all ready to go. That's week 3, is producing your show. And then week 4, we launch it. Week 4, we tie up any loose ends. We're going to add your open and your close to your show to give it a little showbiz, and we're going to post it up to your host, and I'm going to show you how to put it on your website so people can find it. We're going to connect it to all of the podcast platforms so you're ready to rock and roll. We're going to make sure by the end of the 4 weeks, your show is up and running. At the Audience Explosion Blueprint event that I'm inviting you to, we're going to learn how to promote it, profit from it, and create those relationships. We're going to do that at the Audience Explosion Blueprint event that you get the free ticket for. Enrollment is $497, podcasttalentcoach.com/PLA. Now, let me talk about pod fading a little bit. Pod fading, there are 3 reasons podcasts fade away. First one is that it's more work than people thought it would be. They get into it and they're like, man, it feels like I'm doing all this podcast, and by the time I'm done with one, I got to start doing the other one. It's because they lack a step-by-step process to get it done. And in the Podcast Launch Accelerator, what I want to do is give you a process, a step-by-step process that will help you quickly and easily create an episode every week. So you're not working on the podcast all the time. You're not searching YouTube trying to find videos to help you speed it up. You're trying to get in there and knock it out quickly and easily each and every week with a step-by-step process. That's what building your foundation is all about. Your program, your purpose, and your platform. We help you create that process and get through it. The second reason podcasts fade away is they don't grow as fast as they thought it would. Oh, nobody's listening to my show. Well, they don't have a promotion strategy to get out and talk to people who don't know who they are and invite them to the show. And that's what I help you do through the Audience Explosion Blueprint part of this program. And then the third reason podcasts fade away is they don't generate revenue as fast as they thought it would, because they don't have a business system. They don't have a system in place to take listeners and lead them somewhere where they can spend money. And that's what I want to help you do as well. Building relationships allows you to build relationships with a variety of people. You can build relationships through your authority by demonstrating your authority on your podcast. You can demonstrate your coaching on your podcast and build relationships that way. You can demonstrate your products. If you have a book or a course or a program, you can demonstrate a little bit of that on your podcast and lead people to purchase the products. You can answer questions on the podcast from listeners and build relationships with people that way. You can interview your current clients on your podcast, give them exposure, and further build your relationship. You can invite prospective clients on your podcast. I have a client, her name is Zoe Routh. She's a former client of mine. She goes into organizations and helps them break down the silos so departments work better together. And I said, Zoe, how many people listen to your podcast? She goes, I have no idea. I don't even look. She goes, that's not why I use my podcast. I said, really? She goes, yeah, I just use my podcast to open doors. When I call CEOs to ask for a conversation, they automatically put the gate up because they think I'm just trying to sell them something. When I call them to invite them to be a guest on my podcast, they're more than willing to talk to me. And I talk to them to invite them. I talk to them to set up the podcast interview. I talk to them a third time to actually interview them. I talk to them a fourth time when the interview is live so I can show them where to get it. By this time, we have a relationship, and now they'll take my call any day of the week. And now we talk about working together. So she just uses her podcast to create relationships with prospective clients. You can interview partners. You can be on their stage, they can be on your stage. You can interview your peers. You can interview your mentors. If you ever wish you had to have a cup of coffee with somebody, but they won't give you the time of day, invite them to be a guest on your podcast. Have the conversation right there. It's such a powerful way to build relationships. And I would love to have you be part of it. Again, visit podcasttalentcoach.com/PLA. It's $497. In fact, if you visit that page at the beginning of this workshop, I talked about getting that 75 ways to drive engagement with your podcast. You're going to find that at the bottom of that website. So let me show you where to go. When you go to podcasttalentcoach.com/PLA, you'll come to this page here, which will talk about everything that I just told you, shows you everything you get in the package. And then at the very bottom right here, here's your free gift, 75 ways to drive engagement. If you click that, you can download that link right there. All right. The live classes begin Thursday, March 6th. I would love to have you come join me in the chat. I'm going to put the link to the registration page right there. I would love to have you come join me. 4 weeks, an hour a day for 4 Thursdays in March. With that, I have a few minutes for any questions. Anybody got a question about what we've covered? Yeah, go ahead, Bob. Bill. Sorry, Bill.
Eric, you talked about how simple it is in terms of having, just a microphone and a room. But do you also, I mean, I don't know if you recommend like locating somebody who already has a studio set up so that, you schedule it every week and you make sure there's a certain quality to it.
Not necessarily. You want to know the best place to record a podcast? It's in your walk-in closet because walk-in closets absorb all of the noise and the audio quality is great. You don't want to record it in like a room with hardwood floors or tile floors or really hard surfaces because that bounces around a little bit. You just need a room that has some carpet. A lot of times what I'll do is if it's a bouncy room, I'll grab a step ladder and throw like a sleeping bag over it. And that's enough to absorb the audio and it sounds great. You don't really.
I'm just thinking if you're inviting somebody to come and be part of your podcast, I mean, you can't really do it in a closet. So.
True. And if you create a soft room, what I would do is try and get a smaller room. The bigger the room, the more the echo. So if you get a smaller room, even like this, where you're close to the wall, but maybe in front of you, you have some soft surfaces behind your monitor that will absorb some of that audio. Then your guest can be on Zoom with you and you can record right there and use that. It's very convenient for them. You get great audio and you can produce it just like that. So if you have a den or something like that, a bedroom, spare bedroom, you can record in that. Just all you need is one good looking wall. I could have stacks of boxes and garbage over there. You'd never know it. You just need one good looking wall and some soft surfaces and you'll be good to go.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, you bet. A lot of people want to know how long the podcast should be, and there's no magic length. A study was done on Apple Podcasts, and the top 100 podcasts on Apple Podcasts, half of them were over an hour, half of them were under an hour. My old radio coach used to tell me there's no such thing as too long, only too boring. So as long as the story holds momentum and continues moving forward, it doesn't really matter how long your podcast is. What matters is that you're consistent with it. So people are creatures of habit and they want to know what to expect. So I recommend to my clients that they create a consistent length. So if your podcast is going to be 20 minutes, it should be roughly 20 minutes every week, because then they know how it fits in their life, right? They say, well, I work out every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so I listen to Tom's podcast every Wednesday while I'm working out because his podcast is 20 minutes and my workout's 30. It fits perfectly. But if it's 20 minutes this week and it's an hour and a half next week, now I don't know how it fits into my life. But if I know your podcast is an hour long every week and I have a 30-minute commute, I listen to half of it on the way to work and half of it on the way home, and I'm good. So I know where it fits in. Length isn't as critical as consistency. All right. Any other questions?
Hey, Eric.
Hey, Rick.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for owning my brain for about the last couple of years.
Absolutely.
A couple of years ago, we went through all of this. My son and I did, because he's the tech guy, with you, and I've been beaten up time and time again by people saying, "Why don't you have a podcast?" Because I have particular curricula that I want to share via a podcast, particular products and courses and things like that. So I'm going to do it. And I thought, well, I needed to listen to the master another time before I launch all of this. But
Come jump in, Rick. Looking forward to having you.
all right, thanks.
All right. You bet. Well, I appreciate y'all for being here. If you want to do it all again with me, we're doing it again next Thursday, and then we'll launch the following week on the 6th. So you can sign up at podcasttalentcoach.com/PLA. If we hang up and you have questions, you all have my reminder emails for this. Just hit reply. They all come back to me, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions for you. And I'd love to see you in the program.